So citizenship, sorry, I had a break in the recording, but citizenship is different from sort of national identity or political identity because it really does imply your legal status of being allowed to reside within that country. Everyone does not have access or citizenship in every country. In some ways that would be an interesting scenario. There are some people who have dual citizenship, meaning they can carry a passport or an ID for two different countries. The United States does not allow that. So being a U.S. citizen and then being able to carry a passport from another country, the United States doesn't allow. However, other countries do allow it. So like, for example, if you're from Italy, but you were an Italian American, you could have a dual citizenship with Italy because you're an Italian, you were born in Italy, and you could have citizenship in the United States, but not the inverse. Uh, and so citizenship does provide a sort of a sense of belonging, but it's not nearly as I would argue, not as in depth as nationalism or having a national identity. Citizenship is really just says that you, as a citizen of the country, you're guaranteed certain rights and privileges as a result of being a citizen, say, of the United States, that people who come here as guests would not necessarily be able to enjoy. Even though they have to follow the laws and policies, they don't necessarily have to. They don't have a. It's a different type of view of the picture of residing in the country when you're not a citizen. You're kind of like a guest, right? Meaning that you can stay here as long as you adhere to the laws, but there's only a certain amount of time you can stay too. Usually, most countries it's about 3 months, and then you have to go back and leave and then come back, but you can't stay more than 3 months in most countries. There are other ways to get around that if you're working or have get a visa, work visa, things like that. But primarily, um, that's the way it normally operates. Now, as you know, for the many of you who live in the Imperial Valley, or a lot of people who are from Mexico and other parts of south of the border who come to the United States, particularly in our area, and get citizenship, take classes, and qualify for to become a U.S. citizen. And there are criteria to do that. Uh, and so there is the opportunity to do so if you want to do that. But there are various programs that come into play for you to be able to do these things to allow for those things. Now, there's also, interesting enough, in our military system, we have had people who were conscripted to serve in the military who were not citizens of the United States, who were here as non-citizens, but were able to still be a part of the U.S. military. So it can be very subjective at times, the notion of citizenship. Okay, let's move on. So the next one is religious identity. And this is also one of those I would argue that's somewhat complex because uh, religion is one of those things that it's an emotion and philosophical, theological view of the world with the belief in God or a deity of some sort that is the sort of spiritual foundation of who you are as an individual and also sometimes groups. Um, so if you're looking at, like, for example, we have, of course, like, we are a Christian society in the United States, generally speaking, but within that, there are many other nuances. So we have the Catholics, for example, we have the Baptists, we have Mormons, we have Seventh-day Adventists, we have all different types of groups that reside as part to have religious identity within our country. So there's no unitary religious system that it exists within the United States. Um, Unfortunately, because of that, they tend to be sometimes divisive. And so that's very problematic. And a lot of now we have a lot of non-denominational groups as well. But one of the things about religion, because of most political systems that are founded or rooted on religious ideology, so there is this notion that in God and country I serve, and so we have some sort of religious precept to how we're supposed to conduct ourselves. It's on our money, even in God we trust, right? But doesn't mean we always act it out. It just means that it exists within that framework. Um, so the idea of your values or your ideas regarding religion certainly truly are your own, but the implications for controlling the masses, there's probably nothing more powerful than religion, because if the basis of power is the ability to influence, there's not much greater influence than religion in terms of pushing people to either act or react a certain way in society. And so, with that, when we look at the sort of the differences between religious identity and national identity, well, your national identity is just the idea that, for example, you're an American. Within the but within the framework of that, there are a multitude of different religious identities that exist within the nation. So, um, it's a sort of a collective consciousness of groups of people who reside and have a common theological philosophical belief about God, or whoever they decide they want to worship, and how that leads to them to decide uh, policies that are relevant to their lives by virtue of their belief in God, for example. So, and of course, a lot of, like, we just came through a very difficult political period with regard to the woman's right to choose with Roe versus Wade. So we see the impact of religion in driving our politics, even within the United States. There are countries, there are theological societies that exist within the world. One of the primary ones is Iran. It's what we call a theocracy, which basically means your final rule decider or a role decider is the religious leader, not the political entity. So they do have a political structure. However, it is dictated and controlled by the religious order. So it's a very different type of society, and of course the implication, if you would hope that the religious leaders would operate, with a spiritual base, and be peace loving, but and unfortunately a lot of these societies, they use religion as a justification to brutalize the people. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, religion's been used. More people have died in the name of religion in human history than any other form, which is sad to say. That they use, your intolerance of other people's views of the world. People would kill them for their beliefs. So uh, that's sort of the notion that drives sort of religious ideology. So when we talk about the idea of, under this notion of religious identity, the idea of primordial identity, and this again is that your identity is basically fixed at birth, that there is no beyond birth, that whatever you are is whatever you are. Um, and in the notion of religion, they say that this predates the religion itself, so that basically your one's identity is like, is constructed at the time of birth. And then under constructivism or constructivist identity, it's the idea that people have multiple identities, and that as people change. And so because they change, the importance of one identity or the adoption of a different identity may manifest itself, right? So let's use the example of somebody who's transgender and somebody who's born of, say, a boy, and then so under religious pretext, the idea is that once you're a boy, you're always a boy, right? But under constructivist identity, if you decide to change you decide to change your gender identification, well, then that would not fit the primordial identity. It would fit the constructivist identity, because they believe that there are multiple different identities that one can actually assume. Um, And then, of course, there's various measurements for religious identity. Of course, belief is certainly the primary one. Belief in your idea or your God or your religious, and the suppositions of your religion. And so, typically, what happens is, like, for example, people say, "Well, for Christians, why do we have all these different variations? Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, etc., Episcopal, all the Catholics, everybody, right?" And there's thousands of them. And then within each of those groups, there are subgroups. It's like the Baptists have the National Baptists, the Southern Baptists, and all these different variations. And then basically it's all, a group or an individual's view of the picture of religion, and then they basically adopt it and give it a name. And so this is where the idea of, sort of narrowing or kind of focusing on what, your belief, and based on the criteria that are set within your religion that drive the outcome of your faith and belief. Of course, belonging to a particular group, But normally it's based on some idea, not only just your faith, but your traditions and the values of the tradition. People like the Catholic Church because of the traditional, uh, like how they do homilies and different things in the church and the way it's set up. Other people like it because it only lasts 45 minutes to an hour. Um, so it just depends. The Baptist church that I grew up in as a child could be 2 hours plus long, and that was tough. So, but nonetheless, this is the idea, sense of belonging and being with a group is a very, very important aspect of religious identity. A certain amount of behavior, how you behave according to religious pretext and the Bible or whatever book you happen to be affiliated with. Um, Also, the notion of how we practice our faith and the rituals within certain faiths, whether it be Christianity or Judaism or Islam. There are certain rituals that are part of the experience that the individuals for those particular faiths go through that also bond them together. Uh, and then again, religiosity, which is your commitment, or the individual's commitment and strength to that commitment within their religion. And then there are a couple of case studies here, which I'm not going to go into in detail, but I just want to just get to them in just 1 second or after I cover class identity. And class identity basically is like where your socioeconomic class, and this has to do with where so if you're rich, if you're super rich, like the 1%, or you're rich or middle class or poor, it's where you identify yourself. And normally it starts off with economic class, but there's also other classes like social class. You could be poor but be in a different social class, depending on what class identity or how it is determined by the society that you work within or live within. Uh, so they would have the elites, or they would have, usually at least two different classes of people that reside within society. Again, it usually starts off with the economic class based on money and the resources. But the 19th century and before, it was usually land and the ability to own land that drove your wealth and your ability to fit within a certain class. And of course, most people are trying to change their class and go upward. So if you're poor, you're trying to get to the middle class. If you're middle class, you're trying to get up to the wealthier class. And so there's a lot that goes into class identification that dictates the behavior of people as well. But what this represents is that we as human beings are incredibly complex, and there are multiple aspects that define who we are within our societies, that stratify religion and class and socioeconomic standing. Various different aspects of our identities are derived from who we are and where we are in our societies. And that's fairly common under the notion of being a human being and understanding that. So, and typically, like even when there are all the various movements we had in our society, whether it be the women's movement or civil rights movement, all the different, Occupy Wall Street, all these various movements are usually derived from, these political movements are derived from the ideologies that derive from identity politics, and where you identify will drive your ability to dictate the politics of your generation. Okay, so after that, there are there are some case studies here. One is the state of Israel, the other one is Iran, that you feel free to take a look at yourself and be able to sort of gate, take what you've learned and apply them as you go through those last couple of slides. And I think that's it. I think I went way over what I expected, but it's the last one, so um, and that's it. So I wish you guys the best. Have a great weekend, and I will see you on the back end. Take care.